Kansas is reportedly showing interest in Desmond Claude, about a 16-point per game scorer in the Big Ten. What would he bring to KU? How would he fit in with the team?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of the show, Desmond Claude. We're going to deep dive into him because KU is reportedly showing interest in Claude and get into his scouting report, what he would bring to the table, how he would fit in with KU. Also, we'll finish up with a little KU football. Keyan Burnett, who might have been the starting tight end for this year's upcoming team, is leaving KU football, entering the transfer portal. So a lot to talk about on today's episode of the show. It's brought to you by Amazon and the Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. So, Desmond Claude is a transfer from USC, and this was posted by Joe Tipton earlier on Twitter. He said, USC transfer Desmond Claude, one of the top guards in the portal, is visiting Florida on Thursday, sources told On3 Sports, also considering North Carolina, Kansas, and Virginia. The 6'6" junior averaged 15.8 points, 3.5 rebounds, 4.2 assists per game this season. So Claude is an interesting player because he is 6'6", but I don't even know what position necessarily to classify him because he played some point guard for USC this past season. Now, before he was at USC, he spent 2 seasons at Xavier where he was on the All-Big East freshman team as a freshman, and then his sophomore season, the stats went up, the team impact didn't. Each of his last 2 years, Xavier and USC, both teams were right around, slightly below 500. We're still both inside like the top 60, top 70 on KenPom, so he wasn't on, good teams either year, but he wasn't on like horrible teams either, for whatever that's worth. But with Xavier, he was more of like a 2-3. Like one of your Xavier, he was playing like 3-4 even. So you could theoretically slot this guy into anywhere between 1 through 4. Kind of an interesting fit for how KU would want to use him, but we'll get to that in a moment. What about his scouting report? So he is a 6'6", 205-pounder. Again, can play guard or the wing position. He will be a senior this upcoming season, coming off that year at USC where he averaged almost 16 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. He was over 4 assists per game, and then he averaged just 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks per game. Field goal percentage, good, 48.2%. Three-point percentage, not so much at 30.7% on lower volume, 2.3 attempts per game. Free throw percentage was solid, 76.4%. A lot of free throw attempts to 5.8 free throw attempts per game. The effective field goal percentage, only 51.4%. That's slightly below average there, but the true shooting percentage was actually really good, 57.1%. Big reason why was his ability to get to the free throw line and knock him down at least a decent clip there. The on-off numbers like him. The USC was about 6.5 points better offensively when he was on the floor. This past season, they were about 6.5 points better defensively when he was on the floor this season. You go back to his last year at Xavier, they were, several points better offensively when he's on the floor. They were almost a handful points better defensively when he's on the floor that year at Xavier too. So, big usage the last couple of years at his stops, but he's had a good impact when he's been on the floor. Bart Torvik gives him a 3.2 on his scale there. His last year at Xavier, he was a 3.3. As we go through the strengths and weaknesses, I will mention 2 things that I would say I wouldn't put in the strength column or the question column. I guess, but I would, I'd put in, the neutral column. One is rebounding. So 3.5 rebounds per game isn't a ton, but he was being asked to play some point guard at USC. 33rd percentile offensive rebound rate, 62nd percentile defensive rebound rate. The year before at Xavier, the O rebound rate was better. The D rebound rate was worse. I think he's just probably about it. If he's playing the 4 for you, then yes, you have questions about the rebounding. If he's playing more of the 3 for you, then he's probably an average to below average rebounder. But I don't know, it's probably still more than you were getting from like Rylan Griffin and AJ Storr to that degree. But he is somebody who also is not the best athlete in the world, and I think that's part of the reason why he's not the best rebounder in the world. I don't think he's a bad athlete. I just don't think he's somebody I would classify as being on, a great athlete either. Honestly, some of his highlights, if you watch them, some of his like transition plays, how he scores or drives to the rim, will remind you a little bit of just the body of watching Jalen Wilson. The difference there is Jalen had more weight than Desmond Claude had. Jalen also probably had, Jalen was listed 2 inches taller than Claude is. And also Jalen Wilson was an excellent rebounder and Claude is not that. So there's some key differences between those, but there is at least some interesting parts of it there. The strengths to Claude's game, he gets to the foul line a lot. We mentioned the 5.8 attempts per game. He's in the 92nd percentile for free throw attempt rate. So that is something he does very well. And honestly, like that's just a big part of his game. It's rim pressure in general, getting to the free throw line and scoring inside. 95th percentile in paint points per 40 minutes. But honestly, his best area was kind of that floater area. He shot 48.5% in that area that is, according to CBB Analytics, listed as in the paint, which at the rim for CBB Analytics is within 4.5 feet of the rim. In the paint is in the paint, but outside of that 4.5 feet. So a lot of times those end up being either like really mini jumpers or for the most part, it's floaters, right? And so with Claude, 79th percentile in that area, that tells you two things though. One, it tells you that, okay, going back to the athleticism question, a lot of times guys who aren't as good of athletes aren't going to be as explosive finishers at the rim. And so like think about DeJuan Harris, for instance, right? DeJuan had to settle for a lot of floaters. And so you see that. But the good news for Claude is that he was very good at those shots. He was also very good in the mid-range, 47.4%, which is in the 85th percentile nationally. So he is able to stretch it a little bit there. And that is the one thing that I am interested in here, because we'll get to the questions, and part of that will be the three-point shooting. But I will say this. Is there potential for him to be a better three-point shooter this upcoming season? I mean, a lot of times people look to, like, how do you shoot on floaters and free throws? Because if you're good at both of those areas, that usually means you have good touch. And that's not everything with three-point shooting, but a lot of times if you have good touch, if you get the right, form or enough practice, eventually the numbers are going to show themselves out. And so you do wonder, for a guy who's shown to be a good shooter from mid-range, floater range, and the free throw line, is there more potential for what he could shoot at the free throw line, similar to how Jalen Wilson shot a better from three in his final year than he did, obviously, the year before, right? Could he end up being a 33 or 34 three-point shooter? That would kind of be the question here. But he can just kind of get you a bucket, right? I mean, if you're 1K, you'd have more of those. Well, 72nd percentile in points per possession in isolation, also 73rd percentile as a ball screen handler, and then position versatility. Like, that is a plus that you would be bringing him in, and you could play him as a backup point guard. You can play him as a 3. You could play him as a 4 if you need to, a little bit here and there. The versatility is nice to have. Now, some of the questions, that three-point shooting that we just mentioned. With Claude, he has never really been a great three-point shooter so far in his collegiate career, whether you're looking back to the time at Xavier or whether you are looking to the time at USC. So his first year at Xavier, 1.2 attempts per game, very low volume, only 29% from 3. Second year at Xavier, 3.3 attempts per game, but only 23.9%. This year at USC, his best in terms of percentage, but still just 30.7%. It was on 2.3 attempts per game. Now, you watch some of the highlights. He was a little more confident in taking them if guys went under ball screens or if he was left open on spot ups. So, at least he's causing defense to be respectable. But 9th percentile in three-point attempt rate, and obviously the percentage wasn't great either. So that's the big question there. Again, is there more potential there? I think there is, but what is that potential? Is it 32% on 2.5 attempts per game? How helpful is that for a team that needs three-point shooting? I don't know. The inconsistency is also another big thing here. He had 8 games with 3 or less made field goals. So it wasn't consistent when he was scoring. There were also 2 games where he went 0 for. He had an 0 for 3 game. He had an 0 for 9 game. He scored just 1 point against San Jose State. He scored just 1 point against Oregon. He also had 4 points against St. Mary's. He also, though, had 6 games of 25 or more points, and he had 2 games of 30 or more twice. So inconsistencies there, right? And that might drive Bill Self a little mad. Then again, Kansas just got through a season where Zeke Mayo was a starter all year long, and he was a little inconsistent at home and road. But even though he was a starter all year long, I'm sure that was a little bothersome for Bill Self along the way. Too many turnovers on high usage for Claude. I mean, very high usage, 94th percentile. How does that translate over if you come to Kansas where you have Darren Peterson? And then the turnover issue, 16th percentile for turnover rate. He does get a good amount of assists, or did last year at a point guard at USC, but still 46th percentile assist to turnover rate. And if he's not being asked to be the point guard and get as many assists at Kansas, do you just get the turnovers without the assists? And then there's a lack of defensive stats. I will say for this one, I'm not entirely sure how to view Claude as a defender because, okay, he does have good length. That should, at 6'6", make you a good defender. Then again, if he's not the best athlete in the world, that's going to hurt you a little on the defensive end. But the team stat, like the on-off numbers, good for him on the defensive end. By on-off numbers, he's a good defender. If you look at like defensive win shares, if you look at defensive BPM, I'll say he's a at least solid defender on that end of the floor. But then there's not much production of stats. 16th percentile Hakeem rate, a combination of block and steal rate. So, like, I don't know what to think. Is it a combination of the two? Is he an average defender that's just positionally solid, but he doesn't get chaos stats? Or is he just not that good of a defender and he's just happened to be along with some other guys who are good defenders that raise some of his stats when he's on the floor? So I don't know what to think about the defensive end of the floor. But how would he fit in with Kansas? That's a big question. Let's get to that next on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets or baseball tickets or whatever you're looking for right now, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. I'm looking right now for Kansas City Royals tickets against the White Sox. Let's look for the game on Wednesday, so you have a little bit of time to figure out if you want to go or not. I toggle the all-in pricing, I toggle the Game Time picks, and boom, Dugout Plaza, Section 237, row MM, $18 on Game Time. There's plenty of other great deals like that on Game Time where they have last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget to make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. All right, so Desmond Claude, some interest from Kansas. Again, is it real? Is it agents trying to drive up the price? I don't know, but certainly would make sense for Kansas to at least kick the tires here, right? So the fit, I do think that you go back to his fit at Xavier where he's playing more on the wing as opposed to USC where he's playing as a point guard. Now, maybe his experience playing more as a point guard at USC means wherever he wants to go, like he wants to be more as a ball handler. And theoretically, he can be a ball handler as a secondary guy off of Peterson, but you start to get to a point where you're like, okay, you already have, Marco Jackson and Melvin Council who are going to be those secondary ball handlers off Peterson. So do you really want him as I think you're better off there with him on the wing at the 3 or the 4. The question is, if you play him at the 4, I don't think you have enough rebounding there. So you almost have to play him at the 3, which might be fine because Trey White is a really good rebounder. So if you have Trey White at the 4 and Claude at the 3, that can work okay because Claude can score a little bit and White can rebound. But then with the issue that you run into there is, do you have enough spacing? Because then you're talking about between White and Claude combined, you're getting like 4.5 3-point attempts per game on like 31%, right? Not a lot of shots per game from 3 between your two wings, not a lot of percentage between them. 4.5 attempts per game at 31%. Like, that's worse than what Jalen Wilson did his last year at Kansas, just individually. So that would be the big question there. Now, what he would add to the team, obviously getting to the free throw line. Kansas did not get to the free throw line enough last year. And if you're not going to be a good 3-point shooting team, how can you take advantage of that? You can be a better rebounding team. You can be an elite defensive team. You can force turnovers, and you can get to the free throw line at a high rate. So he would help with that if that is where you wanted to steer into and just try to say, hey, we're going to be this lengthy team that is super switchable, has a bunch of guys between 6'5" and 6'9" with long wingspans. We're going to be good on the defensive end. We're going to attack the rim. We're going to get to the free throw line a bunch and try to have success that way. That's what he would add to the team. You'd also give the team somebody else who can, get their own bucket. But if you're having less spacing, is he going to be as effective doing the things that he was good at last year at USC, for instance? That's a real question, one that we saw not translate well for AJ Storr. I think he probably also just gives you more of that versatility, whether it's positionality or just talking about more guys that can switch and have good length all over the floor for you. But what he wouldn't add, obviously, it's the three-point shooting. Obviously, it's the rebounding in what you're kind of talking about as the main ones for those. So, I think, like, bottom line here, if this was like 2 years ago and Desmond Claude was in the portal and Kansas had interest, I would have seen some of these flaws that we've talked about, but I would have seen some of these strengths that we've talked about too, and just been like, okay, this makes sense for Bill Self. And you would have just trusted Bill Self to be like, there's some inconsistencies here, but he's going to get more, he's going to get the best out of him. He's going to, with some of those high swing games, he's going to be able to squeeze more of those out of him and have those. But after these last 2 years have transpired, it has almost become more of a, you really got to be wary with the fit here. And for that specific reason, I almost feel like even though this move would have possible high potential, like I said, he has shown good touch in these other areas that makes you think, what if as his final year, he does shoot 34% from three on 3.5 attempts per game, right? Would that be enough to move the needle a little bit and help with one of those deficiencies? And, the high potential for what he could bring to the table would be very interesting. But it also has a higher, I think, swing and miss rate than the other additions KU. Like, the ceiling on Claude is higher than the ceiling on what Jaden Dawson could be at Kansas. But the floor, I think, for the fit of Jaden Dawson and what he is, I think is higher than what Claude would bring to the table, because the floor is what we just saw this past year with like AJ Storr, right? And the ceiling is obviously the good things that he brings to the table. But for that reason, where you're sitting in a spot where it's like you might have one more splash play based on, NIL money and the allotment of minutes and all that sort of thing, that this almost comes down to, if you bring on Claude, it basically means you are no longer pursuing the other players that would be that splash play. And so when I look at Darrion Williams, when I look at RJ Lewis, who we were originally going to have a deep dive on today, but then this Claude news came out, but we'll get to that eventually. When I look at Jameer Watkins, who we had a deep dive on as well, which that one we were a little, more shaky on than consensus. But even then, still, I would take all three of those guys over Desmond Claude for the fit for KU. The problem you run into here, though, if you're Bill Self, is what if Claude does and again, he's visiting Florida Thursday, so he might just walk out of Gainesville committing. But let's say he was super interested in committing to KU, and let's say he was like, hey, I want to come there. What do you do if you're Bill Self? Do you take the what's saying, the bird in the hand's worth more than two in a bush or something like that? Do you take what would be a known commodity, or do you roll the dice and say, but I like those other players better, even knowing that any of those other players could A, pick another school, or B, stay in the NBA draft? That's quite the risk you would be taking. So what do you do in that situation? I honestly think I would roll the dice if I was Bill Self, just because I love the idea of Darrion Williams that much. And I do like Lewis and Watkins a little bit more than Claude, that at least you have, there's three options, right? A couple that you have a chance to strike out on if the Claude thing doesn't happen. But, I guess I could understand if it did happen where they said, hey, we have to play the safety game. Like, we don't know what's going to happen with those guys. And, I don't think Claude's a bad option. It's just a risky one for KU if they were to bring him on. All right, let's finish up. Keyan Burnett is transferring out of the program for KU football. What does it all mean? This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you hit $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And there's plenty of stuff going on right now, right? NBA playoffs, MLB season's going on, NHL playoffs, which are great. Soccer's going on. You can get early futures on the NFL or college football even. Right now, you can go bet on the win totals for a bunch of different teams throughout the country. And yes, Kansas is one of those teams where right now the over is sitting at 7.5 at -144. The under 7.5 is +118. So they're actually telling you that they think right now Kansas is going to go over. That's exciting. Well, don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks, which thanks for tuning in. Anyway, you get your episodes. We will, on tomorrow's episode, have a little cross comparison. We're going to be comparing the next couple days some of KU basketball's transfer portal additions to recent transfer portal additions they had that maybe didn't work out, to see if, these are going to be better fits on paper coming in. Also on Friday, you're not going to want to miss Friday's episode. We're going to have our yearly episode of If Bill Self Retired Today, who are the top coaching candidates to look at for KU basketball. So make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast and on our YouTube page. All right, so Keyan Burnett is transferring out of the program. This stinks for Kansas, and I'm sure this was unfortunate for the coaching staff. I don't know if it blindsided them. It was certainly late in the portal game. Technically, the portal had already closed. The news came out afterwards, but he would have had to get it in before it closed. It's just the publicity of it came out afterwards. So if you don't remember who Keyan Burnett is, he's a tight end who was originally at Arizona and was a four-star recruit, played, each of his first 2 years. He had his best year this past year at Arizona in 2024 when he had 18 catches, 217 yards, and a touchdown. That was in 8 games. He got injured as well, so could have been even more production from him. But he ends up entering the transfer portal, picks Kansas, and it was a big deal for KU, right? You had lost basically 3 tight ends over the last couple of years, right, with Fairchild a couple of years ago, and then coming into this year, Cardell and Casey. And Deshawn Hanika, who transferred in last year, was coming off a season-ending injury. So Burnett represented a high ceiling as a former 4-star recruit who really started to show it last year. He also represented raising your floor by raising your team's depth and making you feel like if Hanika doesn't come back 100% healthy, you would have a go-to starter in Burnett. And even if Hanika did come back healthy and beat out Burnett, you would just feel really good that you had 2 stud tight ends, which we know Kansas likes to use formations with multiple tight ends out there. Now, when you look at Burnett, I think this is unfortunate because I thought he would have had a good season with KU. I don't know why he's leaving this late in the game. Is the glass half full approach that maybe Hanika was beating him out and he feels like he was going to be the second string tight end? And so the glass half full approach would be that Hanika's coming back from the injury really well and he's looking really good. That's the hopeful response to this. But it's possible Burnett, and even if he would have been the second string, would have played a lot. It's also possible this is just a money play. Who knows with the way things are in the NIL game, or maybe he was homesick, right? I mean, he's originally from Southern California, Arizona, not far away. Probably was a lot easier to get home. Maybe he's just homesick and wants to go home. So I don't know why exactly he's leaving. A lot of possible reasons it can happen, but the end result now for KU is it puts a lot more pressure on Hanika to come back from that injury. It puts a lot more pressure on Leighton Cure to fill in because right now he's probably the second string. And then it puts a lot more pressure on what's a combination of a walk-on and Quentin Conley, although I don't know with the new rule, is he going to become a scholarship player? I don't know how that works. But you have other players who are young guys who, with Jaden Ham, we've been waiting to emerge, and with Carson Brune, who redshirted last year, can he be the lasting gift that Henny Kotelnicki left you? So, can one of those guys emerge to be your third tight end? Because Kansas plays 3 tight ends, and then if one of them gets hurt, who's the fourth string? So I do wonder if Lance Leipold will attack the transfer portal for a tight end at this point. I think it would make a lot of sense if you can get someone to multiple years too. I think that would check multiple boxes for you, but that becomes a quick position that you have to kind of, scatter for at this point in time late in the game. I also wonder the result though of this being that, we saw the bowl game that Jim Zebrowski called the plays for, and like all 3 of the big receivers for KU, Grimm, Arnold, and Skinner, had their moments and helped contribute in big ways of that game. Do we just see, because Kansas brought on some interesting transfer portal receivers, do we just see them now as a result of this run less 2 tight end sets and run more 1 tight end sets where you have an extra receiver on the field or you have an extra, running back on the field? That might make some sense, and maybe that's a response that they have to do, but I guess it'll depend if they can land another tight end in the transfer portal. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back at you tomorrow to do a little KU basketball talk, and the next day as well with a little Jaden Dawson and Melvin Council talk right here on Locked On Jayhawks.